Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for June 6th, 2024. It was 80 years ago today that Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy in France to begin the final process of defeating the Nazis in World War II. There were 160,000 Allied troops, mostly Americans and British and some Canadians, that landed that day and engaged in some very fierce fighting to begin the liberation of France and eventually Germany by defeating the Nazis. There had been discussions between the US and the Soviet Union back in May 1942 about opening a second front in Europe. The United States was open to that, but Churchill urged that it be postponed, saying that they didn't have the logistical capability at that point to do it. This is one of the reasons that Patton and others were very contemptuous of the British, saying that the British allowed the massacre of more people by postponing the invasion. And by massacre, we're talking largely about the brunt of the fighting that was assumed by the Soviets, with somewhere more than 25 million to 27 million Russians who died during the Second World War. Now, the US-Soviet cooperation was key in the defeat of the Nazis then. Where are we today? The so-called leaders in the West are engaged in a proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, defending followers of the Nazis in Ukraine. That is, groups such as those created around the Stefan Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator in World War II in Ukraine, the Azov Battalion, which has open neo-Nazis in their ranks. This is something that's well known to Western leaders. We've seen it emerge a couple of times, and most recently in the Canadian Parliament, where the Canadians, in the presence of Zelensky, honored a Ukrainian war veteran, a war veteran who fought the Soviets. Well, what does that mean? That means he was with the Nazis, and it turned out he was with the Ukrainian SS units that were fighting against the Soviets in World War II. And he was celebrated by the Canadian Parliament and Canadian leadership. We saw Boris Johnson greeting the Azov Battalion in his office in the Parliament just recently, with their Nazi insignias in their banners. The normalization of the Nazis by the West is something of great concern as this war continues, and the West continues to insist that they will fight to weaken Russia. Now, today, as this is going on, this pro-Nazi Western war, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is opening. And there was a press conference held by Vladimir Putin to discuss the context for this. And what he brought up was the announcement that the West will now allow weapons, long-range weapons, to be used by Ukraine to target sites inside Russia. Now, what Putin said is, if it's considered possible to supply such weapons to the war zone to strike our territory, why shouldn't we supply similar weapons to those regions of the world where they'll be used against the sensitive sites of these countries? We can respond asymmetrically. This is a recipe for very serious problems. Now, what does he mean by very serious problems? Well, possibly crossing the red lines that would lead to the use of nuclear weapons. And this is exactly what Scott Ritter warned on Judge Napolitano's show 3 days ago, before he was pulled from a plane to be prevented by the US State Department from participating in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. What Ritter said on the Judging Freedom show is, quote, "We are one ATACMS launch away from everybody dying." The Russians aren't playing games here, unquote. Now, ATACMS are the long-range U.S. missiles that Biden is expected to supply to the Ukrainians. In responding to the Ritter statement, Helga Zepp-LaRouche said yesterday in our weekly dialogue with me, she said, "I can only say that the judgment of Scott Ritter is that once they start to use the ATACMS missiles, which has a much longer range and could actually reach deep into Russian territory, or if German Chancellor Scholz capitulates again and allows the Taurus cruise missiles to be deployed to Ukraine, this could lead to the absolute destruction of Moscow, the Kremlin, and it would mean a guaranteed World War III. And we are absolutely sitting on that powder keg." And she concluded, "Therefore, one ATACMS away from Armageddon is exactly where we are, and we have to really get the population mobilized." Now, at the same time, the question of what is Russia's intent at the St. Petersburg Forum was addressed by Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for the president of Russia. And he said that they'll be discussing plans for the October summit of the BRICS. That is the alternative alliance that's been organized by Russia, China, Brazil, India, and South Africa to allow for an alternative to the dollar system, since the dollar system has been weaponized against the development of the global South nations. So Peskov said that the purpose of this October summit of the BRICS will be to promote international cooperation, encourage scientific and technological progress, as well as effectively tackle the challenges the international community faces. And he said that there is a growing part of the international community in favor of building a just and democratic system of international relations based on the principles of genuine equality, consideration for each other's legitimate interests, and respect for the cultural and civilizational diversity of all nations. Now, what is Joe Biden saying in this moment of great international tension and crisis? Well, as there's a discussion of the need to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine and the Israeli genocide against Palestine, Biden is praising himself, as he did in an interview that was published in the June 4th issue of Time magazine. Listen to some of this delusional language of Biden. Quote, "We are the world power." And he goes on to say that we have a value-based as well as practical-based alliances around the world. NATO, he said, is considerably stronger than it was when I took office. I put it together. Not only did I reestablish the fact that it was the strongest alliance in the history of the world, I was able to expand it. And he brags that he was the one who got Finland brought in. When he had met with Putin, Putin said he wanted to see the Finlandization of NATO, namely move toward neutrality. But Biden said he's going to get not the Finlandization, but the NATOization of Finland. And guess what? Biden said, I did it. I did it. And we're now the strongest nation. We have the strongest alliance in all of America, all of history. And he said that it's for that reason that it's necessary to continue the arms flow and the funding and the commitment to support Ukraine in the proxy war against Russia. He went on to say that Putin's trying to reestablish the Soviet Union, which is completely wrong. And he was asked, what does peace look like in Ukraine? And Biden said, peace looks like making sure Russia never, 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 never occupies Ukraine. That's what peace looks like. And it means that they are a part of NATO. Now, at the end of this interview, and again, we're talking about a man whose picture should be in the dictionary next to the definition of the word delusion. He said, quote, look, name me a president that's gotten as much done as I've gotten done in my first 3.5 years. Now, that's the kind of delusion of the so-called wartime president that threatens not just peace, but threatens the lives of everyone on the planet. Now, in order to give you more background on this, I'm going to be linking in the description section the video of my dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche yesterday, also the video of last Friday's call of the International Peace Coalition, and there'll be another one this Friday. And I want to remind you that since tomorrow is Friday, then we'll take your questions. So you can send me your questions and comments to harleysch@gmail.com. So keep in mind today the veterans of World War II, for it was on this day 80 years ago that over 4,400 gave their lives in order that the Nazis could be defeated. And we must never, ever forget the sacrifice of those who lost their lives in just wars, as opposed to the kind of unjust wars to promote an imperial unipolar order today. So thanks for joining me. Don't forget to communicate with me with your questions and comments, and I'll see you tomorrow.